The red scarf at Yaquina Bay. The wind off the Oregon coast carried the scent of salt and rain, rolling in from the Pacific in gray waves that battered the cliffs below. In the spring of 1915, the Yaquina Bay Lighthouse stood as a lonely sentinel over the restless sea, its lantern dimmed, its walls streaked with the scars of decades. Few visited it anymore. The newer, grander light at Yaquina Head had stolen its purpose years before, leaving the old tower to molder in fog and silence. But some places never lose their watchful eyes. On a cold April morning, Muriel Whitaker arrived at the lighthouse. She was 17, slender, bright-eyed, and newly arrived in Newport with her widowed mother. Her mother found work as a seamstress for a family inland, leaving Muriel restless, drawn toward the wildness of the coast. Locals said she was too curious, too daring for her own good. The stories had begun long before she came, whispers that the old lighthouse was haunted. Fishermen swore they'd seen lights flickering in its upper windows on moonless nights, though the lamp had been extinguished for years. Others spoke of voices echoing from the cliffs, of a woman crying over the roar of the tide. Muriel had laughed when she first heard them. "A lonely house by the sea," she'd said, "can make anyone imagine ghosts." So on that gray morning, when the mist rolled thick across the water and gulls wheeled above the headland, she walked the winding trail to the abandoned lighthouse with a notebook in hand, intending to prove the rumors nothing but fancy. The door, half swollen from rain, resisted her at first. When it finally gave way, it did so with a long complaining groan. The air inside smelled of damp wood and rusted iron. Dust motes floated through the slanted light from a cracked window. She stepped across the threshold, her boots echoing hollowly. The rooms were small and spare, a kitchen with a rusted stove, a parlor with a broken chair, and the remains of a book scattered across the floor. The stairs wound upward in a tight spiral, vanishing into shadow. Somewhere above, something shifted, the faint scrape of movement. "Hello," she called. Only the wind answered, rattling the shutters. Still, she climbed. Each step creaked beneath her weight. The narrow passage coiled around the central column like a ribcage. When she reached the top, she found the lantern room empty, the great glass eye clouded with grime. Yet there was something else, a red scarf draped over the railing as though left behind by another visitor. Its silk shimmered faintly, vividly, even in the gray light. Muriel frowned. She hadn't seen anyone on the trail. She lifted the scarf, running it through her fingers. It was warm, impossibly warm, as if someone had just taken it off. Then she heard it, a low hum, distant yet close, vibrating through the walls. It sounded almost like singing. "Is someone there?" she called again. The hum stopped. And then, faintly from the stairwell below, a whisper. "Leave," Muriel froze. Her pulse quickened. She turned, peering down into the narrow throat of the staircase, but saw only darkness. The air thickened. The temperature dropped so swiftly she could see her breath. Somewhere deep within the walls, a door slammed. Muriel clutched the scarf and hurried down. Each floor seemed darker than before, as though the day outside had dimmed. When she reached the entryway, the front door was ajar, banging softly in the wind. She stepped out, gasping for the sea air, the red scarf still clutched tight. She ran home, heart hammering, and told her mother what she'd seen. Her mother laughed gently and said she must have frightened herself. The mind, she said, can play tricks when left alone in silence. But that night, Muriel could not sleep. She lay awake, listening to the rain against the window, the scarf draped over her chair. Sometimes in the rhythm of the storm, she thought she could hear that same hum, a woman's voice, soft and pleading, calling her name. 2 days later she went back. No one knew why. Perhaps she wanted to prove to herself that it had all been imagination, or perhaps the voice in the rain had called her back. That morning, a heavy fog swallowed the bay. Fishermen stayed ashore, their boats tethered like restless ghosts along the docks. A shopkeeper claimed he saw Muriel walking along the cliffs, her red scarf trailing behind her. Another said he saw her standing by the lighthouse door, staring up at the tower before stepping inside. She never came out. When the fog lifted by evening, her mother raised the alarm. Search parties combed the cliffs and beaches, their lanterns bobbing through the mist. They found nothing, no footprints beyond the lighthouse, no sign of struggle. Only the scarf, found near the base of the tower, half soaked in seawater and darkened by a small pool of blood. The sheriff wrote his report in careful, factual words. No evidence of foul play. Presumed accident, fall from the cliffs. But those who knew the coast doubted that. The rocks below the lighthouse were jagged, yes, but the tide that week had been unusually low. If she had fallen, they reasoned, her body should have been found. It never was. After Muriel's disappearance, the lighthouse was sealed once more. The government declared it unsafe, its stairs rotting and foundation unstable. But the locals kept their distance for other reasons. They said that when the fog rolled in off the bay, one could still hear her, the faint echo of a young woman's voice calling for help from within the tower. Years passed. Seasons changed. The sea went on erasing and remaking the shore. But the story of Muriel Whitaker lingered. Fishermen swore they saw a figure in white standing at the lantern room's window on stormy nights, her hair blown wild by the wind. Children dared one another to climb the hill and touch the lighthouse door. None ever stayed long. Some said they heard whispers beneath the roar of the waves, others, a sobbing that seemed to come from the stones themselves. In 1921, a group of surveyors came to inspect the old structure for possible restoration. Among them was a young man named Daniel Haskins. He had grown up hearing the tale of the vanished girl, and though he laughed at superstition, he found himself uneasy as they ascended the spiral stairs. At the top, the others began taking measurements, marking the walls. Daniel wandered toward the railing, and there, folded neatly over the sill, was a red scarf. He froze. The fabric was old but intact, its color still bright as fresh blood. There was no draft, no reason for it to be there. When he turned to call the others, he found himself alone. "Henry?" He called, no answer. The lantern room was silent, the air pressing close around him. Then, faintly below, the sound of footsteps. He leaned over the stairwell. "Hey, you down there?" The footsteps stopped. Something brushed against his hand. He looked down. The scarf had twisted around his wrist, though no breeze had moved. Daniel tore it off and bolted down the stairs. When he reached the bottom, the door hung open to the fog, but his companions were waiting outside, asking where he'd gone. They swore he had never left their sight. He quit the job that evening. The lighthouse was left untouched for another decade, then two. Eventually, the town decided to restore it as a historic site. Workers cleaned and painted, installed railings, and opened it to visitors. They said the place felt lighter after that, the air no longer heavy, the shadows less watchful. Yet even then, on certain misty mornings, guides reported odd things, a red scarf appearing in the tower and vanishing again, a chill in the air just before closing, and once, the echo of footsteps on the stairs when the building was empty. In 1938, an old keeper who had served before the light was decommissioned returned to visit. He stood by the railing, looking out at the endless gray sea, and said quietly, "She's still here. The sea won't let her go." To this day, no record of a girl named Muriel Whitaker exists in the town archives. No census, no obituary, no photograph. The storyteller who first spun the tale claimed he'd based it on coastal whispers, nothing more. Yet the people of Newport remember her all the same. And sometimes when the fog drifts in heavy and low, the red light from the Yaquina Head beacon glows through the mist, and those who live nearby say they can hear a voice carried on the wind. A young woman's voice, calling from the cliffs, calling from the tower, calling from the dark. "Please, don't leave me here." And beneath the sound of the sea, faint but certain, the echo of silk brushing stone, as a red scarf drifts slowly down the stairwell of the Yaquina Bay Lighthouse, forever waiting for the girl who never came home.